Hey guys, tonight we're stepping inside what you think of as a grand medieval castle. Tall towers, roaring fireplaces, maybe even a bed. You imagine yourself slipping beneath velvet sheets, safe inside massive stone walls. The problem? If you really spent a single night there, you'd freeze faster than leftover soup on a January morning. Your modern, thermostat-loving body simply isn't built for this. Picture it. You're pacing through a great hall with ceilings so high the echoes never stop. Candles flicker, torches sputter. You're ready to get cozy in your castle bedroom. Except, here's the ugly truth. Those walls are basically giant refrigerators. Stone doesn't keep you warm. It sucks every ounce of heat straight out of your body like a medieval vampire. The reality? Most castle interiors were brutally cold, without insulation, without glass windows, and without central heating. Temperatures inside dropped to nearly the same as outdoors. A hearth fire could warm a corner of the hall, sure, but walk 3 paces away and you were back in Arctic misery. Medieval people wore layers of wool not for fashion, but pure survival. Forget pajamas, you'd be sleeping in every piece of clothing you owned. And those huge fireplaces you imagine in castle movies. They were laughably inefficient. Heat escaped straight up the chimney, leaving the rest of the chamber icy. It's like trying to warm your house by opening the oven door for 5 minutes. Sit might toast your nose hairs, but the rest of you is still frozen. Mainstream fact: archaeological studies of British castles like Dover and Kenilworth show living spaces averaged just a few degrees warmer than outside, especially in winter months. Think of it: outside temperature 5 degrees Celsius, inside maybe 7 degrees Celsius. Cozy? Not even close. Some lords literally ordered hay and rushes piled onto floors and even into beds to trap warmth, turning their chambers into glorified animal stalls. Imagine lying down on a straw mattress so full of bugs you'd think it was moving on its own. Sweet dreams. Historians still argue whether castles were primarily military strongholds or meant for domestic comfort. The balance is clear: defense first, comfort dead last. You might defend against invaders, but pneumonia would conquer you in a week. Now shift to a scullery maid trudging in after midnight, arms shaking as she dumps firewood onto dying embers. Her breath fogs the air inside your bedroom. She mutters that lords think they're kings, but all of them still shiver like peasants. You roll over, teeth chattering, realizing she's right. Sure, basically paying premium rent for a stone icebox. So the next time someone romanticizes castle life, remind them it was basically camping. Except the tent was 50 feet tall and the floor was made of misery. Joke 1: forget Netflix and chillin'. A castle, it was just chill. Joke 2: your weighted blanket. In medieval times, it was 3 wet dogs. Joke 3: modern HVAC might be boring, but at least you're not spooning a chamber pot for warmth. But cold walls were the least of your worries. Because while you're shivering in your straw bed, you suddenly feel something crawling on your leg, and that's where the next myth gets disgusting. You try to settle in for the night, still shivering from those freezing walls. At least you think you can finally rest. But the moment you lie down, the reality of medieval life begins to crawl literally over your body. The bed is not soft cotton or spring mattresses. It's straw, clumped together, damp from humidity, and alive with fleas. Every shift you make sends tiny legs scurrying across your skin. The smell is the first thing to hit you. A pungent blend of smoke from the hearth, rotting rushes on the floor, and the unmistakable musk of animals that share the same roof. Castles were not hermetically sealed palaces. They were working buildings, crowded with servants, guards, cooks, even livestock. Wherever food went, rats followed. And wherever rats thrived, fleas carried disease. Imagine trying to sleep while you hear the constant scratching of claws in the walls and the squeak of rats, chasing crumbs across the rush mats. Torches flicker, casting quick shadows across the chamber. And for a second, you swear something just darted under your bed. You pull your blanket tighter, but that only traps more fleas against your skin. This wasn't an occasional nuisance, it was everyday life. Vermin were so common that people barely commented on them. Flea combs were sold in markets. Cats roamed freely through halls, not as pets, but as pest control. Even royalty could not escape this misery. If you thought being a noble spared you from bites, think again. In fact, nobles often had heavier, more luxurious bedding, which made the perfect flea nursery. The irony is brutal. Outside enemies battering at castle gates might never breach the walls, but inside, armies of tiny parasites were already conquering everyone. No knight's armor could protect you from that constant itch in the dark. And just as you begin to doze off, finally ignoring the scratching and squeaking, another nightmare begins, not crawling, but suffocating, because the very room you're in is about to choke you in a different way. You've made it past the icy walls and the fleas, but you still tell yourself, maybe somewhere else in this castle is better. Maybe the servants' quarters at least offer comfort. That thought doesn't last long. The servants' quarters were nothing like the elegant chambers you see in films. They were tucked into drafty corridors, crammed beneath staircases, squeezed above kitchens where smoke rose thick and unfiltered. Instead of private rooms, servants slept shoulder to shoulder on floors or on rough pallets. There was no escape from the noise. Clanging pots, shouting cooks, boots on stone floors at all hours. The castle never truly slept, and neither did its workers. Imagine trying to fall asleep with smoke curling through the beams above you, your eyes watering, your throat raw. Fires were lit in kitchens at all hours to bake bread, stew pots, and boil vats of ale. Ventilation was almost non-existent. You'd wake up in the night, choking on the acrid taste of wood smoke, ears ringing from the constant banging of ladles against iron. Privacy didn't exist. Servants changed, prayed, argued, and snored, all in the same crowded spaces. Any scraps of warmth came not from blankets, but from the press of human bodies beside you. In winter, that closeness was the difference between shivering and surviving. In summer, it was suffocation, and the smell sweat mixed with smoke, damp clothes, and food waste hung in the air like an invisible fog you could never escape. Think of the hierarchy. Nobles in drafty chambers at least had beds, straw and fleas included. Servants got little more than rushes spread on floors. A lucky one might share a straw mattress with 3 others, each shifting in the night to claim the warm spot. The unlucky lay on cold stone, wrapping their cloaks around themselves, praying not to be stepped on when someone stumbled through in the dark. And sleep itself was never secure. You could be roused at any moment by a bell, a knock, a call from your master needing hot water or midnight bread. Your body never reached deep rest. It stayed, half awake, alert to commands. The castle wasn't your home, it was your workplace, and the work didn't end with sunset. Now picture yourself in one of those quarters, eyes stinging from smoke, lungs tight, back aching from the hard floor. You cough into your sleeve, wishing for fresh air. But even stepping outside offers no relief, because the stench of latrines seeps through every corner of the castle. Waste pits and chamber pots, emptied too close to living spaces, meant that foul smells clung to the very stones. You tell yourself, just endure the night, just get through to morning. But the hours drag like centuries. The snores and coughs of those around you echo in the narrow chamber. A child stirs and whimpers. An old man mutters in his sleep. Someone rolls over and elbows you in the ribs. You curl tighter, pulling your cloak over your head, trying to block out the world. Yet still, the sound of dripping water from the roof reminds you that the castle itself is alive, groaning, leaking, sighing with every gust of wind. For servants, misery wasn't an occasional accident. It was their constant companion. To live inside a castle wasn't a privilege, it was punishment, disguised as duty. Your modern self, spoiled by mattresses, blankets, and even earplugs, wouldn't last 2 hours before begging for escape. And if you thought the misery of servants' quarters was unbearable, the castle had an even darker secret. Beneath your feet lay a world of shadows, where sleep was not merely uncomfortable, but impossible. Because down there, the dungeon waited, and its nights were worse than nightmares. By now you've endured the cold walls, the crawling fleas, and the suffocating servants' quarters. You tell yourself, at least I'm not locked away in the dungeon. But in a medieval castle, that reassurance rings hollow because the dungeon is never far away. Even as you try to sleep, the sounds from below drift upward, a distant clang of chains, the low moan of someone in pain, a scream that echoes through stone passageways before vanishing into silence. The dungeon isn't a storybook. It's a hole in the earth, damp, airless, and designed to strip away every trace of comfort. Just knowing it exists beneath your bed would be enough to keep you awake all night. Step into that darkness for a moment. The air is thick with rot, the stench of unwashed bodies, mold, and excrement. Torches sputter weakly, casting long shadows that dance along dripping walls. The floor is slick, water pooling in uneven corners. Rats scuttle freely, gnawing on scraps of bread tossed to prisoners like feed for livestock. Shackles hang from the walls, cold iron biting into raw wrists. A prisoner here does not sleep, they collapse from exhaustion. Chains clink whenever they shift, jerking them awake. Hunger gnaws at their stomachs louder than any rat. Some dungeons had oubliettes pits where people were dropped and forgotten, left in total darkness until madness overtook them. Imagine lying there, blind, counting heartbeats as days blur into nights. For you, one night in such a place would feel like eternity. The worst part, the dungeon was deliberately placed where its presence could not be ignored. Servants walked above, hearing muffled cries through floorboards. Guards chuckled at the rattling of chains, as if it were background music. Lords dined in great halls, their tables not far from human misery echoing below. The castle was built to remind everyone from lowest servant to highest guest that punishment lurked right underfoot. Your modern mind seeks silence and darkness for rest. In a dungeon, silence meant waiting for the next scream, and darkness wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. You'd never find comfort there, only restless terror. The mere thought of being thrown into that pit would keep you wide-eyed in your bedchamber, heart pounding with every muffled sound. Picture the unlucky man chained there tonight. His clothes are ragged, his skin bruised, his lips cracked. He mutters prayers under his breath, or maybe curses. The torch sputters out, plunging him into total blackness. He jerks awake every time a rat brushes against his foot. He tries to count how many hours remain until daylight, but in the dungeon, time itself disappears. And above him, you, lying in your chamber, listening to faint noises seeping through the floors. Every groan, every chain rattle, every cry that suddenly cuts off, it all seeps into your bones. You realize you are not safe, not in comfort, not even free. You're part of a fortress that thrives on fear. Sleep here is impossible, because nightmares aren't confined to dreams, they are built into the very architecture. You roll over, pulling your thin blanket tighter, but the weight of that dungeon presses against your chest like an invisible burden. You tell yourself morning will bring relief, but the night is long, and the castle has more ways to torment you before dawn, because hunger prowls just as cruelly as cold and chains. And when the kitchens are bare, even a lord's banquet hall offers no safety. You've survived the stone chill, the fleas, the smoke, and even the haunting echoes of the dungeon. You tell yourself, at least I won't go hungry. A castle must have endless food, but hunger, more than cold or rats, was the most relentless enemy inside these walls. The kitchens, so lively in summer and autumn, grew desperate in winter. Harvests spoiled, meat rotted in poorly ventilated stores, and salted fish turned slimy long before spring arrived. Grain ran low, ale soured, and cheese hardened into rocks you could break a tooth on. The image of kings feasting on roasted boar and overflowing tables, that was the exception, not the rule. Most nights, even nobles stared at bowls of thin, potaja watery stew of barley and cabbage while peasants gnawed on bread, so stale it had to be soaked in ale just to chew. Imagine sitting in the great hall, your stomach growling as servants place trenchers before you. They're not fine porcelain plates, but old hunks of bread cut flat to soak up whatever greasy stew drips across them. By the end of the meal, the bread is soggy, collapsing, crawling with flies. That bread is then thrown to dogs, pigs, or sometimes the poorest servants. You'd never look at dinner the same way again. Food shortages were more than uncomfortable, they were dangerous. Malnutrition weakened bodies already battered by cold, smoke, and vermin. Colds turned to fevers, fevers to pneumonia. In some years, whole communities around castles withered, and even the lords within the walls could do little but ration. During famines, desperate peasants boiled grass, bark, even leather scraps, just to fill their bellies. Your modern pantry, stocked with snacks, canned food, and delivery apps, would feel like a miracle to them. One night in a castle during the depths of winter could leave you lightheaded, trembling, and still hungry after the last bowl was scraped clean. The irony was bitter. Castles stored food in bulk, yet the very bulk attracted mold, pests, and spoilage. Granaries leaked, rats chewed through sacks, and meat hooks sagged with carcasses gone gray. Salt preserved some fish, but salt was expensive, and too much of it left food nearly inedible. Every bite carried the taste of decay. Picture a servant trudging up the stairs, balancing a tray. On it sits a hunk of bread, a lump of cheese gone green, and a bowl of weak stew. He sets it before you with a bow, but even he knows you'll grimace. Still, you eat because hunger is stronger than disgust. And when the food ran out entirely, castles turned to desperation. Hunting parties were sent into forests, hoping for deer or rabbits to keep hunger at bay. But in deep winter, even the forests were empty, and hunters returned empty-handed. That's when famine turned brutal, when bellies ached, when eyes grew hollow, when even dreams were filled with food you'd never taste. You toss in bed, stomach growling, lips dry. You think of the dungeon below, and realize you're not so different from the prisoners after all. Everyone inside these walls suffers together, chained not by iron but by scarcity. And yet, the cruelest trick of all comes next. Because even if you had food, even if you had warmth, even if you had a straw bed without Fleas' comfort still slipped through your fingers. Because the great myth, the one whispered in every storybook, is that royalty lived in luxury while peasants froze outside. The truth? Not even kings and queens were safe from the misery of a medieval night. You've crawled through the castle's worst corners, cold walls, crawling vermin, crowded servants' quarters, the hollow darkness of dungeons, and the gnawing hunger of Winterand. Now you tell yourself, at least the royalty are safe. At least the king and queen have comfort. That's the story everybody wants to believe. Tapestries, velvet, roaring hearths, endless roast. The truth is harsher. Noble life inside a castle was a different layer of suffering, not a luxurious bubble. The furs and tapestries often hid the same problems, just with prettier covers. Start with the so-called beds. A royal bed was larger and draped with curtains, yes, but the construction and materials didn't guarantee warmth. Heavy curtains kept drafts out to some extent, but those huge canopies trapped damp and cold inside rather than sealing in heat. Feudal lords slept under piles of furs and thick linens, but that only delayed the shiver. Much of the time, heat pooled near the skin and escaped almost as quickly as it came. The upper classes layered clothing and bedding until movement was awkward. Sleeping became a discipline rather than rest. Windows were a particular betrayal. You imagine stained glass and sunlight. Instead, most windows were tiny slits with shutters, or if they had glass, it was thin and expensive and rarely used in private chambers. In frigid months, a shutter was still a shutter airtight. Noble chambers often faced the wind and the rain. A tapestry on the wall looked ornate until you pressed your hand to it. Then there's the smell. Yes, nobles could afford luxury perfumes and incense to mask odors. But those coverings merely layered a different scent over the same problem: sweat, unwashed skins, and the lingering reek of animal hides used as blankets. Chamber pots were a daily necessity, and without efficient disposal, the smell seeped through corridors and rooms alike. A queen might command the best soap money could buy, yet soap then was abrasive and often ineffective. Frequent washing wasn't the rejuvenating ritual you now imagine. It was a cause of chapped, raw skin and increased exposure to the cold. Privacy was another illusion. Even kings and queens lived with a rotating cast of attendants, chamberlains, pages, wet nurses, and advisors who slept within earshot. Doors were left open in drafty halls. Curtains did not block the constant foot traffic. A monarch's sleep was punctured by late-night council, petitions, or unexpected alarms. The great hall's noises traveled farther than polite distance, and the sovereign's chamber was rarely the sanctuary you expect. Disease did not discriminate. Nobles had better access to physicians and more varied diets in good years. But poor sanitation and close quarters meant that outbreaks swept through both courts and commons. Plague, dysentery, and respiratory illnesses found their way into royal families as readily as into peasant cottages. A noble's better bedding often made an ideal refuge for fleas and lice. And the very opulence of a court crowd's visitors. Banquets created vectors for contagion. Power dynamics contributed to the misery. A lord or lady could command resources, but those resources were not always reliable. Taxed lands failed in bad harvests. Treacherous supply lines and robberies could cut off provisions. A royal household had to maintain appearances, which meant reserves were hoarded or rationed in ways that left servants, and even lower-ranked retainers, hungry while the table superficially remained full. The spectacle of feasting sometimes covered a reality of thin soups and diminishing portions. Comfort, when it appeared, was fragile. A sudden siege could change a feast into rationing in one night. A winter storm could sever food and fuel supplies. Even heat from the great hearths was dangerously inconsistent. A fire left to roar could ignite wooden beams, so fires were controlled. And that meant warmth was rationed. Spatially, not everyone could stand close enough to benefit. In short, the royal bubble was an unstable illusion built atop the same vulnerabilities that afflicted the rest of the castle. And there was the psychological weight. Being noble carried responsibilities, stewarding lands, settling disputes, holding court. Sleep was often socio-political theater. Lords could not simply withdraw. A shocking, urgent, late-night message, a wounded messenger. The sight of militia on the horizon could shatter any attempt at rest. The stress of rulership kept minds alert and bodies tense, which made deep sleep rare and dreams thin. A king's throne might sit on a cushioned dais, but his nights were often raw with worry. So when you imagine noble warmth, think instead of a race, piling furs, draping tapestries, layering clothing, and praying the granaries hold. Think of kings shivering with the same human need for heat, but too proud to show weakness. Think of queens who, despite their rank, were subject to the same drafts, the same poor plumbing, the same pests. Luxury softened the edges, but did not erase the core problems. The architecture that protected them from swords and siege engines did not protect them from cold, vermin, rot, or hunger. You lie there in your imagined bed, and the castle around you breathes like an old beast, creaking, settling, sighing. The last thought before sleep steals at all is a small, bitter one. The difference between you and royalty in that fortress is not safety from suffering, but the ability to mask it. You might have furs instead of a cloak, a chamber pot with a lid instead of an open bucket, a mattress raised instead of a pallet, but the night's necessities remain the same: warmth, food, quiet. In those simple terms, The king and the servant are not that different. And still, the castle has one more cruelty stored for you, one that makes even the memory of cold and hunger feel trivial. Outside those fortified walls, winter is not merely an inconvenience. It's a decision point between staying and leaving. The dawn may force you to choose whether to brave the frozen world beyond or remain trapped inside the stone prison, each with its own risks. You've pulled through one night, and all the misery that dripped from the castle's bones. You think maybe the rich had a secret weapon, thick curtains and ornate tapestries that lined their chambers. Surely those decorations softened the bite of winter air. But stand in the chamber of a lord on a January night, and you will see how false that comfort was. The walls are draped in woven cloths, patterned with saints and battles, dyed in vivid blues and reds. They look magnificent in the firelight, as if warmth itself is stitched into the fabric. But press your hand against one, and the chill flows straight through. The tapestry is only a veil, a thin skin over raw stone. It may catch the eye, but it cannot hold heat. Curtains around the bed promised privacy, even luxury, yet at night they worked against you. They trapped air, yes, but the air inside was already cold. Instead of insulation, you created a box of damp, stale breath. A noble might crawl under furs behind those curtains, only to wake, sweating, then shivering, as dampness settled into the cloth. You toss and turn, realizing the silk and velvet you dreamed of are now clammy and heavy, pressing down like wet sandbags. The medieval mind accepted this. A tapestry wasn't truly for warmth, it was for display. It showed wealth, power, patronage of skilled weavers. It was theater, not insulation. The poor froze openly. The rich froze in style. And in the dark of night, when the fire died down, both shivered the same way. Think of the people who tended those decorations. Servants beat the dust from them, knowing that rats sometimes gnawed the edges. Moths found feasts in the fibers. The grand designs faded under smoke and soot. What once looked like heaven's radiance became just another layer of filth clinging to castle walls. Imagine lying beneath those heavy curtains, eyes wide open, hearing the winter wind whistle through the shutters. The tapestry muffles the sound, but not the cold. You close your eyes and dream of modern walls, scintillated, sealed, unbroken by drafts. But when you wake, you are still inside the stone vault, your breath fogging in the air. Luxury was a mask. The castle played dress-up with fabric, but fabric could not change physics. Stone remained stone, and cold seeped through everything. Your night inside this noble chamber is no more survivable than the servant's pallet or the prisoner's chains. The only difference is that when you froze, you did so beneath woven saints instead of bare stone. You roll onto your side, pulling the curtain tighter, but the wind finds a way through. The torch burns low. The tapestry sways ever so slightly as a draft sneaks behind it. And in that moment, you realize that decoration is just another trick of survival. Something to convince yourself that misery is lessened when it is draped in color. But the next reality strikes harder. If the walls and fabrics betray you, perhaps the fire will save you. A blazing hearth should turn the hall into a sanctuary. Except the truth is crueler still. The hearth gave almost no one warmth, and sometimes gave them something worse. You have seen how tapestries and curtains offer only the illusion of comfort. So naturally, your next hope is the fire. A medieval hearth, surely that's where warmth was found. You picture a roaring blaze in the center of the great hall, flames licking upward, sparks glowing like stars, heat spilling over everyone gathered nearby. But step into that hall for a night, and you'll understand the betrayal. The fire gave light, it gave smoke, it gave danger, but warmth only if you were lucky enough to sit right beside it. The fireplaces of castles were massive, often tall enough for a person to walk into. Logs the size of tree trunks were burned to keep the flames alive through the night. Yet the physics were against them. Stone walls absorbed the little heat the fire managed to produce. Drafts snuck in through every crack, tugging warmth away. Chimneys carried most of the fire's energy straight up into the sky. At best, the hearth warmed a narrow circle. Sit too close and your skin roasted while your back still froze. Step a few paces away and the air was as sharp as the night outside. Now picture yourself in that hall at midnight. The flames roar, but your seat is 20 feet from the hearth. Your breath fogs in the air, your fingers stiffen, and you watch nobles shuffle closer, jostling for the precious seats within the fire's short reach. The lower servants, unlucky ones, hover at the edges, catching nothing but smoke. Everyone coughs, eyes watering, as the air fills with soot. Fire did not banish the cold, it only replaced one misery with another. And always there was the danger. A stray spark landing on rushes spread across the floor could turn the great hall into a death trap within minutes. Thatched roofs, wooden beams, and hanging draperies all waited to ignite. Castles burned often, their supposed stone invincibility undone by the smallest ember. So while you huddled near the hearth, desperate for warmth, you also lived with the fear that the flames might devour you before dawn. The fire was no quiet companion either. Logs cracked and thundered, sending showers of sparks across the stones. Chains clanked as pots of stew or cauldrons of ale were hoisted over the flames. Guards shouted, dogs barked, servants bustled in and out. The hearth was a workplace, a noisy engine of survival, not a calm place to doze. Any chance of rest nearby was broken by smoke in your eyes, the stink of burning fat, and the endless roar of firewood being consumed. Your modern fireplace is decoration, glass doors, iron grates, clean burning wood or gas. A medieval fire was brutal, alive, unpredictable. It demanded constant feeding, and it punished neglect. Fall asleep and let the logs burn down, and the hall froze within an hour. Stay too near, and your clothes might catch or your skin blister. The fire was a master, not a servant, and everyone bent their nights around its needs. So you pull away, coughing, tears streaming, fingers still numb despite the heat. You realize the hearth offered no guarantee of comfort, only another compromise, another danger. You're trapped between freezing and burning, between smoke and sparks, and the long night still stretches ahead. Yet the greatest insult of all waits close by. It isn't the cold, or the fleas, or even the fire's betrayal. It's something more intimate, more unavoidable, because no matter how noble or poor, every person in this castle had to face the same nightly ordeal, the stench of waste, thick and inescapable, lurking just beyond the bed. You think maybe you can endure the cold walls, the scratching fleas, the smoky air, even the fickle hearth. But nothing prepares you for the stench. It is the most democratic misery of castle life. Noble or servant, king or kitchen boy, everyone had to answer nature's call. And in the middle of the night, that meant the chamber pot. Picture yourself in a curtained bed. The fire has burned low. The draft has found your feet again, and now your stomach twists. You climb out of bed, shivering, and reach for the pot tucked under the frame. It's just a clay or metal bucket, sometimes with a lid, often without. You squat awkwardly, praying the draft doesn't cut colder against your bare skin. Then you slide the pot back under, but the smell lingers, sour and thick, a cloud you cannot escape. This wasn't rare, it was nightly reality. Servants used them, nobles used them, guests used them. Whole families might share one. Some chambers had 2 or 3, all lined up, waiting to be emptied in the morning. Until then, the odor seeped into bedding, curtains, and tapestries. Combined with smoke from the hearth and rot from old rushes, the air became a heavy stew of filth. And then came the disposal. In the morning, servants carried the pots down narrow staircases, sloshing as they went. Sometimes the contents spilled onto the steps. Sometimes they didn't wait, for morning windows were thrown open and waste hurled into the moat or courtyard. A passerby might be unlucky enough to walk beneath at the wrong moment. To live inside a castle was to accept that your night's rest ended with a new assault on your senses. Now imagine you're not in a noble chamber, but in the servants' dormitory. No fine curtains, no lids, just shared pots. The smell saturates the whole room. You try to sleep with your cloak pulled over your nose, but the stink seeps through, sour and unrelenting. Rats are drawn to it, dogs nose at it, and flies gather the moment daylight returns. Your rest is broken, not by dreams, but by nausea. Even kings weren't spared. A monarch might have a pot of silver or porcelain, but silver doesn't trap smell. Queens employed attendants to whisk pots away quickly, but quickly was still minutes too late. Perfumes and herbs were burned to mask odors, but scents mingled rather than vanished. Roses and lavender laid over human waste, a sickly sweet perfume of desperation. You roll in bed, trying to ignore it, but your stomach knots. The more you think about the smell, the worse it clings. The walls may have been fortified against arrows and battering rams, but they were no defense against the one enemy that always seeped through, the castle's own waste. And while you gag quietly in the night, another thought grips you. What if this is as clean as it gets? What if the chamber pot is luxury, and outside the walls people simply crouch in ditches? The realization doesn't comfort, it deepens your despair. You lie awake, eyes watering, lungs heavy, wondering how anyone called this life normal. Just when you think you can't endure more, another sound cuts through the stink and silence. Not rats this time, not chains or coughing, wings, a flutter above your bed, a scrape against the rafters, a shadow darting across the wall. Because, in castles, the night didn't only belong to people. Other creatures claimed the dark too. The chamber pot's stench is still clinging to your nose when you realize you are not alone. A shadow flits across the wall, too fast and silent to be a servant. You hold your breath, listening. Then it comes again, the scrape of claws on wood. Your heart stutters. Because in a medieval castle, the night didn't belong just to people. It was shared with creatures that slipped through cracks, hid in rafters, and swooped when the torches dimmed. Bats were common squatters in castles. They loved the high beams, the dark corners, the endless supply of insects buzzing around the hearths. At night they circled silently, wings whispering against the air, sometimes dipping so low their leathered tips brushed a blanket. One might startle awake and tumble onto your bed, scratching frantically before flying off again. No mosquito net, no sealed windows, no screens, just you and whatever decided to drop in. Owls, too, found their way inside, especially when doors and shutters were left open for airflow. Their hoots echoed eerily through halls, blending with the moans from the dungeon and the snores of servants. A noble might wake in panic, certain the sound was an omen. In some traditions, the cry of an owl meant death was near. You lie awake, listening to the mournful call, your skin prickling at the superstition. And then there were insects, endless armies of them, drawn by food scraps, smoke, and waste. Beetles scuttled across rushes on the floor. Spiders spun webs in corners, waiting for flies fattened on chamber pots. By candlelight, the webs gleamed like silver threads, but touch one in the dark, and you'd feel the sticky strands cling to your face. Bedbugs lived in straw mattresses, feasting on sleepers until dawn. The itching, the crawling, the constant sense of being watched by tiny legs, it robbed even the pretense of rest. Even larger intruders wandered in. Cats, half wild and lean, stalked the halls hunting rats. Dogs curled near the fire, fleas leaping from their fur to your blanket. Birds nested in rafters, dropping feathers and worse onto the floors below. In winter, desperate animals, foxes, even wolves might creep close to the gates, howling through the night. Their cries drifted inside, merging with the already uneasy chorus of castle life. Your modern bedroom is a sealed bubble. Walls and windows hold the night at bay. In the castle, there was no such line. The night poured in through every gap, every crack, every door left ajar. You tried to wrap yourself in furs, bury your face, and will sleep to come. But the flutter of wings above, the hoot in the rafters, the scurry at your feet, they never let your mind slip fully into dreams. Imagine it now. You are half asleep, drowsy from exhaustion. A shadow dips across your curtain. You jerk awake. Was it a bat? A rat? Something worse. Your ears strain. You hear claws skitter, a squeak, the faint brush of feathers. Your heart races. You lie stiff, every nerve waiting, every hair on your neck prickling. And even when the sound fades, the unease remains. You are not alone in this place. You never were. And if the animals weren't enough, the people weren't quiet either. Because castles were garrisons as much as homes. Soldiers paced, guards shouted, boots slammed against stone. Armor clattered at every change of watch. And for anyone trying to sleep, that constant hammer of noise was its own kind of torture. You're already awake from the flutter of wings and the scurry of rats when another sound erupts, this time unmistakably human. A shout bounces off the walls, followed by the thud of boots on stone. Armor rattles like chains being dragged across the floor. The guards are on their rounds, and they do not move quietly. Castles were not libraries. They were military machines, and even in the dead of night, men-at-arms stomped through corridors, spears clattering against shields, swords jangling in scabbards. Their orders were barked, not whispered. The walls magnified everything, turning each step into a thunderclap. Sleep became a fragile thing, shattered whenever a watch changed or a patrol passed beneath your chamber. Think of the routine. At set hours, the bell tolled, calling guards to swap places on the towers. The bell itself was loud enough to startle you upright, heart pounding. Then came the shuffle of boots, the grinding of doors opening and slamming shut, the muttered curses of men too tired to keep their voices low. Every 2 or 3 hours, just when you began to drift off, the cycle began again. And these weren't the polite neighbors you imagine. Guards drank. They brawled. They sang Bodhi songs to keep themselves awake. Laughter rang down corridors in the small hours, echoing like ghosts. Sometimes quarrels broke out, steel against steel, voices raised in fury until an officer barked them down. The castle at night was not a silent fortress. Even the nobles weren't spared. A king's chamber sat close to the guardrooms by design, safety through proximity. But that also meant the clang of weapons was a constant lullaby. Queens complained of being jolted awake by the rattle of chainmail. Children cried when the watch bell rang too close to their doors. Silence was impossible when every hallway was a drum. Now picture yourself lying on a straw bed in one of those chambers. You're exhausted, body aching, eyes heavy. Just as you drift, a crash jolts you awake, a dropped spear, a slammed shield, a guard cursing loudly in the stairwell. Your pulse spikes, and the fragile thread of sleep snaps. You roll over, burying your head, but the noise crawls back in, relentless. The irony is sharp. These men were meant to protect the castle, to keep watch for enemies beyond the walls. Yet, for those inside, they became tormentors of another kind, not with swords, but with sleeplessness. And if the noise of men and weapons wasn't enough, the mind added its own. Because in the silence between patrols, your thoughts filled with things darker than footsteps. Superstitions, whispers, fears of the unseen. For medieval people, the night wasn't just noisy, it was haunted. The guards' shouts and the clatter of armor fade, but the silence that follows is worse. In the gaps between noise, your mind begins to invent its own terrors. And here, in a medieval castle, superstition thrives like mold on stone. People believed the night was a realm of spirits, demons, and curses. Once the torches dimmed and shadows thickened, imagination filled every corner the firelight could not reach. A draught whispers through the tapestries, and you swear it's a sigh. A floorboard creaks above you, and you're convinced it's a ghost pacing the rafters. Medieval chronicles are full of such tales, lords who woke screaming that witches had sat on their chests. Servants who swore they saw glowing eyes in dark staircases. Priests who muttered prayers when the wind howled like voices. Night terrors weren't just imagined, they were explained through belief. Sleep paralysis, that crushing weight you sometimes feel on your chest, became proof of demons. Nightmares weren't bad dreams. They were assaults from spirits. A cough in the dark might be plague, a shadow across the curtain, a sign of death. Every small disturbance became an omen. Now imagine yourself in that bed, already sleepless from cold and fleas. You close your eyes, but your mind keeps replaying every whispered story you've overheard. The prisoner who claimed to hear chains dragging after execution. The monk who swore a black dog stalked the halls at midnight. The old nursemaid who whispered that restless souls of the dungeon rose at night. Once those tales take root, every flicker of torchlight becomes proof. Fear grows louder than any guard's boots. You pull your blanket higher, heart pounding, trying not to breathe too loudly. Because, in the medieval mind, noise might draw something closer. The silence itself is sinister, pressing against your ears, making you believe you hear things that aren't there. And when real noises come, the hoot of an owl, the cry of a child, the cough of a servant, they merge with the imagined. Suddenly the castle is alive with unseen presences, each demanding your attention. Sleep doesn't come. Dread does. Superstition made night endless. Even nobles with chapels in their castles prayed for protection before lying down, muttering charms against spirits. Crosses were hung, herbs stuffed into pillows, iron blades placed under beds to ward off demons. But belief only fueled fear. If you needed so many charms, surely the danger was real. And just when your eyes start to close, a real alarm can strike. Shouts from the walls, horns blowing, panic rising. For the castle was never entirely safe, not even from human enemies. Siege could come at any hour, and nothing shattered sleep faster than the cry of an attack in the dark. Just when you think the worst of the night is superstition and shadows, the alarm sounds. A horn blares from the tower, harsh and urgent, echoing through the corridors. Guards shout, doors slam, boots pound the stairs. The castle is under threat. Whether real or rumored, siege nights were the most terrifying of all, because they stripped away the last fragile layer of rest. Picture it, you're jolted awake by the blast of a horn. Outside, enemy soldiers may be gathering in the darkness, their campfires glowing on the horizon. Inside, chaos surges. Men stumble, half-dressed into armor, clanging metal so loudly it drowns your own thoughts. Horses scream in the stables. The air fills with the acrid scent of pitch being heated to pour down the walls. Sleep is gone. Adrenaline has taken its place. And yet the waiting is worse than the action. Most siege alarms came at night because fear multiplies in the dark. You huddle in a chamber, listening as guards argue about whether the enemy will attack at dawn or wait them out. The uncertainty gnaws. Hours pass, and no assault comes. Still, no one dares return to bed. The castle buzzes with anxious wakefulness. For the lords, siege meant strategy. For the servants, it meant labor. Fires had to be kept alive, water hauled up, weapons sharpened. Everyone was pressed into duty, even the young and old. Imagine carrying buckets of water up endless stairs while your heart pounds with fear. Imagine trying to calm a child who has woken to the sound of war. And hunger loomed larger during sieges. Supplies were rationed the moment a threat appeared. You might have eaten poorly before, but under siege, the meager scraps grew thinner still. Sleep was impossible on an empty stomach, with the knowledge that every bite had to last. Fear reached its peak when silence returned. After the horns faded and the guards settled into watch, the castle lay in uneasy stillness. You strained to hear movement beyond the walls. An arrow knocked, a ladder scraping against stone, the whisper of an army crouched in the dark. Every gust of wind became a threat. Every creak of wood felt like the start of an attack. This kind of night stretched endlessly. There was no rest, only waiting. The darkness outside the walls seemed alive with unseen enemies, and the darkness inside the halls churned with restless souls. Whether an attack came or not, the castle's inhabitants woke in the morning, hollow-eyed, worn, more exhausted than the day before. Siege nights robbed not only sleep but hope. And when dawn finally broke, it brought no comfort. It revealed the same walls, the same hunger, the same danger. It revealed that you had survived another night, but barely, and that many more nights like this might follow. After such nights, even dreams of escape turned sour. Because leaving meant death in the cold wilderness, and staying meant death by inches within the walls. In the end, one truth remained. A single night in a medieval castle was enough to break the body, but many nights could break the soul. You have survived the worst the castle could throw at you: stone that steals warmth, vermin that crawl on skin, smoke that claws at lungs, hunger that hollows bellies, the clank and shout of men who never sleep, and nights so long the mind invents terrors to fill the hours. By now the thought of leaving seems both simple and impossible. Escape looks like salvation, but the world outside is not mercy. It is winter, wolves, bandits, and fields that give nothing. Even the idea of stepping beyond the gate feels like a choice between slow poison and sudden death. Morning light finds you slender and raw from the night. You pack the little you own into a small bundle, feeling the weight of everything you must abandon if you go. You think of the road, miles of frozen mud, fords swollen with ice, villages shuttered and suspicious. Roads are lines between dangers. Every mile carries the risk of stumbling into thieves who would kill for a loaf. Every footfall could be the last if your toes freeze and you cannot pull them from the cold. Survival outside depends on skills you do not have: tracking, hunting, trade. Inside, you at least know the rhythms, the spots where the hearth warms if you are lucky, where the Lord's pity drops a crust. Outside, nothing is guaranteed. If you choose to stay, you barter your freedom for precarious continuity: a place by the wall, a job carrying water, a narrow scrape of bread rationed by the steward. You become part of the castle's machine, fed enough to keep working, never enough to feel safe. Your nights remain unsafe, your days cramped with labor, your body bending until it breaks. The castle gives shelter, but not solace. It is a roof made of compromises stitched together by fear. Women leave more rarely than men. Their networks, family ties, and domestic responsibilities hold them. Men wander more, risking everything for a chance at better land. Children cling, and old people cling harder. People gamble with their hopes. You weigh the math: probability of theft on the road versus probability of death from disease or malnutrition inside. Numbers feel abstract when your stomach snarls and your feet ache. Choice narrows to instinct. Running is rarely an escape, and often a death sentence. Bandits on winter roads do not negotiate. They know who walks with only one blanket or who limps from a frostbite wound. They strike at the stragglers, the weak, the lone travelers. Yet staying might mean slow erosion, your health chipped away by coughs, your mind worn thin by endless nights. Both roads end in ruin if luck does not step in. Dreams of escape do not stop at logistics. They are emotional compasses, point toward dignity and agency. To leave is to reclaim movement, to refuse the slow humiliation of rationed life. To stay is to protect the few attachments you have, the child you feed from your portion, the old aunt who cannot walk the roads. Neither option holds clean answers. The weight of choosing crushes more heavily than any stone. You imagine stepping out at dusk, slipping through a back gate while the guards argue, tucking yourself beneath a travel cloak and melting into the night. You picture fires in distant farms where a stranger might offer stew for work. You imagine being small and invisible, begging bread, rowing across rivers, sleeping under hedgerows. Those are the fantasies that will not keep you warm. They are the kind that break when the sky turns white and the wind finds your bones. Some leave and survive. Some leave and vanish from all records. Many return after weeks or months, hollow-eyed, with stories you do not want to hear. Most who attempted escape never find the beginning of their new life. The world beyond the walls is merciless for the unprepared. For every tale of a successful flight, there are 10 graves. So you stand at the gate, 1 foot inside the castle and 1 foot in the frozen world, and you feel both fear and a strange clarity. Survival is not a single act, but a series of small decisions repeated daily. The castle taught you one brutal truth: safety is relative and often imagined. Tonight you learned that the illusion of protection can be as damaging as the threat outside. You tuck your bundle tighter and breathe the cold air. The gate creaks. Somewhere far off, a bell tolls. You step forward or you step back. Either choice writes the rest of your story in small, hard letters. One night was enough to teach you how fatigue, fear, and necessity bend a person until they either break or bend back differently. You will carry these lessons whether you leave or remain. You will carry the smell of smoke, the sting of fleas, the taste of thin pottage. You will carry the knowledge that survival in this age is a skillless arithmetic of risk versus risk, and no margin for error exists. And yet, even now, a quiet thread of hope persists. People endure because they must, and endurance sometimes becomes cunning. You might barter. You might learn to forage the hidden roots beneath snow. You might work at the coldest hour to snag a crust. That's how lives continue, not by heroic escapes, but by tiny acts of adaptation. By holding on through one more dark, one more dawn. The castle changes you. It narrows your options and sharpens your instincts. It teaches you to recognize where warmth is hidden and where kindness might be bartered for bread. It makes survival a craft. As you stand there and choose, remember this: a single night in a medieval castle is enough to strip the illusion of comfort away. It teaches you what people will endure, how fragile comfort can be, and how much you already possess that those people lacked. The choice to leave or stay will never be neat, but after tonight you understand the calculus better. You have learned the rules of survival in a place that promises protection but delivers trials. That knowledge, grim as it is yours to carry forward. The night is finally behind you. Images fade, the howl of wind around stone, the flutter of unseen wings, the constant small betrayals of comfort. You are held now in the softer light of reflection. Rest does not come from the castle. It comes from the awareness of what you have and what you have escaped. Let your breath lengthen. Let the muscles in your shoulders uncoil. The cold, the fleas, breathe slowly. As you exhale, imagine warmth wrapping around you like a thin cloak, not the false heat of a hearth spent, but the steady human warmth of a blanket pulled tight. Think of small mercies, a simple meal, a roof that does not creak with damp, a bed that does not host strangers in the night. Those comforts are ordinary to you now, but once they were luxuries, rare and fragile. Allow the sounds of the castle's night to recede into the past. Chains fall silent, bells stop tolling, wing beats vanish. Your heartbeat slows. The mind softens its sharp edges. You do not need to hold the images any longer. Let them pass like fog over a field, becoming memories that teach without torturing. If sleep comes, let it be gentle. Let your thoughts drift unforced toward mornings that bring small, steady light rather than alarms. If worry surfaces, return to breath. Count the seconds between inhales and exhales, and feel the body relax with each count. Comfort exists in the simple circumference of your breath. When you wake, you will carry with you a deeper sense of gratitude for the small, everyday comforts you might once have taken for granted. A morning without cold drafts, a meal that fills, a quiet hour. These are not trivial. They are the real luxuries of human life. For tonight, let that understanding be a balm. Subscribe before you drift off, so you wake to new history every night.